There's something truly magical about being all alone in the wilderness, sitting quietly and watching the stars come out after sunset. On the evening after the total solar eclipse this past August, the area around Sawtooth Lake in Idaho was completely empty of the more than 200 people that had been there just hours before. This beautiful serenity was just too good to pass up, so my friends and I decided to stay one more night just to relax and enjoy ourselves. Hi there, fellow outdoor photographers. This is Matthew Seville for NatureTTL.com, and in this video I'm going to show you my process for capturing a day-to-night time-lapse transition in which the Milky Way appears over this beautiful scene as darkness falls. Now we are heading down the trail from the ridge, McGowan Pass, to the base of Sawtooth Lake to set up our final night time-lapse of the sunset and the Milky Way. The sun is already kind of setting on the rocks here, but there's no clouds in the sky, so it's not that big of a deal if I don't set up for another 20-30 minutes. And just gonna get the day to night transition and then the stars coming out. And I think we got a really cool spot figured out that we scouted. We've been past this spot twice now, or 3 times now, so I think it's going to be a really good option for the Milky Way. There's possibly clear skies. We'll see how long they last. All right, well, let's get set up. The biggest decision you have to make right now is auto exposure or manual. You could try aperture priority with auto ISO maybe, but eventually all cameras will fail to meter properly at about 30 or 40 minutes after sunset, no matter how much EV compensation you dial in. The only camera that I know of that is an exception to this rule is the Sony a7S. So for this tutorial, we're going to use manual. That's usually the best way to learn stuff anyways. First, don't forget to think about your creativity though. Before you set anything up, figure out your composition and think about how the time-lapse is going to look as the light changes on the landscape. If you want to know where the stars are going to be in the night sky, there are a lot of apps you can use on your phone. My personal favorite is Sun Surveyor, which is available for both Android and iOS. Next, set up the equipment itself. For this time-lapse, I'm going to add a motion device that will pan the camera from left to right to follow the Milky Way through the night sky. The device I'm using for this is my tried and true Alpine Labs Radian. It's super lightweight, so it's great for hiking and backpacking in the wilderness. Make sure you get your tripod perfectly level and very stable because you're going to have to touch your camera during the time-lapse to change that exposure. If you have a strong, sturdy tripod, then don't worry about your camera's shutter or mirror causing any vibration and image softness, just so long as you're shooting wide angle. However, if you're doing a telephoto time-lapse, or if you have a really flimsy tripod, then go ahead and turn on that 2-second timer, exposure delay mode, electronic shutter, whatever you got, just to be safe while your shutter speeds get slow. Next, we have to attach all the cables and stuff for this time-lapse. I use an external battery that plugs into the camera as a dummy battery so that I can run the time-lapse continuously for 3, 4, 5 or more hours straight without having to swap batteries. The other cables are for the time-lapse device itself to communicate with the camera, and one last cable that goes to my phone so that I can program the time-lapse device. Since this time-lapse has camera movement, I'm going to decide how many degrees of rotation I want. Since I'm following the Milky Way through the sky, I'm going to set the rotation to be about 15 degrees per hour. The last time-lapse setting I have to dial in is the shooting interval, how many seconds in between the start of each exposure. Since I know my exposures are eventually going to be 30 seconds long, I'm going to set an interval that is slightly a bit longer than 30 seconds. And since I'm doing motion on this time-lapse, let's set the interval to be 35 seconds. That'll mean 5 seconds in between the end of the one exposure at 30 seconds and the beginning of the next exposure. Alright, now that we've figured out the details of the time-lapse, we have to finalize the camera settings themselves. I do a quick test exposure, check my histogram, see where I stand. It looks like I'm going to be at f4, a 25th of a second, and ISO 100 to start. One last check of your composition, your focus, your sharpness at 100%, of course. Don't forget that. And then click start on that time lapse.
Well, we got it set up and it was a little late. I wish I had caught a little bit of the sun going up the mountain a little bit more, but we got the day to night transition going. I'm going to have to manually check this every 5 minutes, so I better set an alarm on my phone right now and bump up the exposure. And we'll see how it turns out.
Alright, here we go. I'm going to play this back pretty fast, but not full speed, so we can see what's going on. Clearly, the 35-second intervals make the exposure get darker with each and every click, because this time-lapse started right after sunset, not before. Whenever my timer beeps, I look to see how dark the histogram is getting, and then I brighten it up by a whole stop all at once, sometimes a little bit more if I messed up and waited too long. Ideally, though, you want to keep your histogram somewhere in between 1 and 2 stops underexposed. First, brighten up your shutter speed, of course, but before that gets all the way to 30 seconds, I'm going to start bumping up my ISO to the highest that I'm comfortable with, because if I keep my shutter speed at 15 seconds or so, it makes it a lot easier to check my histogram in between shots and make exposure adjustments that way. Anyways, on that note, let's play it back again a little faster. Yikes, it looks bad. You might be wondering why we didn't use aperture priority or at least change the exposure manually in third stop increments. Well, you should definitely use third stop increments if you're cutting it close with your exposure's dynamic range or if your shadows are getting really noisy. But at ISO 100, my Nikon D750 can easily handle whole stop jumps without causing any smoothness errors in post-production. So I cheat a little bit, and that way I don't have to check my exposure every single minute, and I don't have to bump the camera to change the exposure as often either. On that note, let's talk about the editing. Before I go into Lightroom or Bridge though, first I need to use another program to smooth out those transitions for me. The program is called LR Time-lapse, and it's hands down the best, if not the only, program for doing this task. Unfortunately, LR Time-lapse is only compatible with Adobe's Camera Raw engine editing settings, so you can't use this method with something else like Capture One. When you first open up LR Time-lapse, find the folder of images and watch it create a line graph of the actual brightness values of each image. Now, this whole post-production workflow could be 5 or more videos long, of course, so for the sake of time, we're just going to go over the basics of the workflow. In the Visual Workflow tab of this main panel, just follow the steps. The first button, the Keyframe Wizard, will create 4 starred images which you will edit in Bridge or Lightroom. The second button, the Holy Grail Wizard, is where the magic happens. It will automatically mark each point where you changed your exposure by a significant amount, and it will apply an exposure adjustment to each frame gradually so that the transition appears smooth. And once this tool is done identifying and correcting the abrupt transitions, you can do a few more modifications, such as brightening or darkening the whole time-lapse, or other tweaks that allow the time-lapse to, for example in our case, start off brighter and end up darker. Next, you go into Lightroom or Bridge and just see how smooth it looks. I'm going to use Bridge so that I don't have to deal with the import-export saving metadata process in Lightroom, but it's pretty easy both ways. And this transition looks pretty smooth, so I'm going to find the 4-star images and just open those up in Camera Raw. I'm going to fully edit each of these keyframes just the way I want them, even if they have a bunch of totally different settings like white balance and cropping. When we go back into LR Time-lapse, it will note all of those changes and make them smooth. Okay, back in LR Time-lapse, click the Reload button to see how those edits you just made in Bridge turn out, then click the Auto Transition button. That'll adjust all of the things like white balance and cropping and whatever else you changed. Last but not least, there is a final deflicker tool for even more smoothing. Especially if you have a Nikon camera with a mechanically controlled aperture, I highly recommend using this feature, using visual previews for the best smooth results. Now there's nothing left to do but throw some music on it and enjoy. Thank you folks for watching, and please do leave a comment to let us know if you have any questions. We would love to get more in-depth about this area of outdoor photography, so comment below and we'll try to bring you more videos like this one very soon. Click subscribe, turn on the notifications, and we'll see you next time. Take care.